We now have a little more clarity on what might be behind India's massive COVID-19 outbreak, which is now so bad that it's driving up the cost of cremation, so people are dumping bodies in rivers. The WHO said yesterday it's labeling a strand first discovered in India a, quote, variant of concern. Scientists are looking into it because some hypothesize that its mutations might make it easier to catch and more likely to get past a vaccine, which just goes to show there doesn't seem to be a way out of this pandemic other than to stop the virus from getting opportunities to mutate in the first place, which requires getting vaccines out across the entire world fast. That's what India has been trying to do. In October, it, along with South Africa, asked members of the World Trade Organization to back a proposal to waive intellectual property rights for COVID vaccines. Last week, the U.S. signed on and said it would put its muscle into negotiations. If that can sway the handful of other holdout countries at the WTO, it would mean any manufacturer would be allowed to, let's say, make a Pfizer or Moderna dose without getting sued, a privilege that would only last as long as the pandemic. This IP is valuable, a word the former chief medical officer of Moderna used when I asked him about this last year for Vice on Showtime. Is this a technology that you're going to patent? Is this a technology that you're going to make open source and available to people around the world?
So this is a highly valuable technology, one that had required billions of investment and years of effort by private enterprise. I think our goal is to ensure that it's accessible to those who need it the most.
Sure.
But in our book, I don't think that necessarily mandates donating IP.
Moderna ended up deciding to not enforce its COVID-19 related patents and said it was willing to license its vaccine IP. But that's not the same as sharing how exactly they make their vaccine, which is clearly the next step here. Plus, the strategy of rich countries protecting their own doesn't really work if variants evade vaccines. I spoke with Tahir Amin, who pivoted from working in intellectual property law to helping found an organization that works to expand access to life-saving vaccines. European countries in the United States were able to purchase or pre-purchase tons of vaccine. And so we've got them, but a lot of people in the global south don't.
Right. I think it's something like 85 countries, the poor countries, that won't see a vaccine until 2023.
Wow.
And this is why there's such a momentum to say, well, if we can get more manufacturers in, more suppliers, we could still, even if they only start producing at the end of this year, could still be that projection.
Mm-hmm. And so to make more available vaccines, the idea is if the intellectual property could be shared, then manufacturers in other parts of the world could just spring up and start making them.
Absolutely. So, that's one component. Get the barriers out of the way. Get as many barriers out of the way so that we can scale up supply. Now, it may be that only a certain amount of other manufacturers in the global south, for example, could produce these vaccines by themselves. Like, the newer mRNA vaccines may require a little bit more effort, but some that we've spoken to think they can do it alone. And then there are other issues like regulatory issues that they have to get the vaccine approved, the trial data. So the IP is a big part of it. We could get way further down the road if we remove some of those barriers.
If we go as we're going now, when will some countries in the global south be able to have access to vaccines?
Predictions are based on current supplies and the vaccines that are currently on the market. There may be some new ones that come into the market. We are talking about end of 2024, maybe early 2025, like the lower income countries.
That's like in 4 years.
Yes.
That's a long time.
That's a long time, and we could get new suppliers in within 6 months to 8 months.
If
we suspended the IP, if we all played together.
Huh.
Remember, there's 40 manufacturers in developing, part of the developing country vaccine manufacturing network. And many of these are pre-WHO, World Health Organization, pre-qualified for other vaccines. They provide 3.5 billion doses for other vaccinations that they make. So why can't we utilize that capacity?
And India would be a great example as well.
It's a great example. It's only using a third of its capacity at the moment. There's other companies in there that could really bring value to the game.
So in a sense, we're talking about vaccine equity, but we're talking about just the relationship between the global north and the global south,
exactly.
Which you kind of know has been extractive over the last 100 years
Absolutely.
or so.
Yeah. I mean, it's been extractive in many ways. I mean, one of the arguments that the industry's making, or a lot of commentators are making, is, we can't trust these global south manufacturers to make these vaccines.
Vaccine imperialism.
Yeah.
And intellectual property, something that is so boring to even say out loud, could be the key to
It is the key.
saving a lot of lives.
It is a key. It's basically who holds knowledge. I mean, even in the colonial days, it's who holds supply systems and what have you. We're back in that quasi-colonial system. We talk about equity and racial justice in the United States in this critical moment, and yet we are not teaching equity abroad.
The US hasn't been the only powerful holdout at the WTO. There's also the EU, and the French president made it sound like the US support of the waiver now is just a big, empty show. Emmanuel Macron said that if the US wants to play generous, there are two things it can do right now: donate vaccines and donate the ingredients to make them. I wanted to get a sense of how this all checks out with a biotech manufacturer on the ground in India. Let's say Johnson & Johnson sends a bunch of people over to a company like yours or others to start producing it, to share the technical know-how. How long between that and people getting shots in their arms?
Probably take about 8 to 9 months, even at the fastest pace, to be able to adapt that technology. If we make some missteps in terms of wrong scale-ups, wrong processes adopted, or some challenges in terms of material availability, which is turning out to be a big problem as well, then we are looking at stretching of those timelines.
Tell me about the material availability. What do you mean by that, and why is that a problem?
So most of these vaccines, especially the biological ones, require bioreactors, require resins and media to grow these cells. And most of these come from the Western countries, either Germany, US, Sweden, or Japan. And they're all, sort of swamped with orders right now. So most of those are not actually reaching India on time. So hopefully that logjam will be cleared in order for us to scale up.
So there's more problems than just the IP, is what I'm hearing from you.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. IP is the least of our worries right now.